Is your home an emotionally safe environment? What does that even mean? Today, I talk with Dr. Joshua Straub, author and speaker, about the importance of emotional safety in family dynamics, particularly in marriage and parenting. He emphasizes that emotional safety allows individuals to express themselves without fear of judgment or punishment, which is crucial for healthy relationships. This discussion covers practical steps to create an emotionally safe environment, ultimately encouraging listeners to prioritize their marriage and family, and most importantly, their relationship with God. Without further ado, here is Dr. Straub. Dr. Josh Straub, welcome to the WinShape Marriage Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had the pleasure of being at a retreat, a WinShape Marriage retreat that you spoke at. So I know a little bit about you and your background, but those listening or watching might not know. So would love for you to just tell them a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much. So been married for 15 years to my wife, Christi. We got 3 really amazing children that we're so grateful for. Landon is 13, Kennedy's 11, and then Micah is 5. So we are in 3 different seasons. We got teenager, preteen, and kindergarten. So it's a wild time. We run an organization called Famous at Home. And so we're helping families to be famous at home. I do a lot with military and with athletes and musicians and folks, entrepreneurs who they are famous on their stages. And the single greatest thing that I typically hear is I can go to work and lead hundreds of people and I come home and don't know how to lead my own family. Mm-hmm. And that's really where Famous at Home got started. And from there, we started working with, for me, the heart of it was really kids and how do we raise great kids? And the core of that was emotional safety. And it kind of flowed from there into marriage, into parenting, but then also into leadership because it's the hub of the wheel, whether we're working with leaders, marriages, or with parents. And helping kids understand their emotions. And so that's where Famous at Home came out of. And my wife and I lead it together. We have a podcast called Famous at Home. And it's a joy to get to do life together and to also work together and also to parent together and also to homeschool together and really live out what it is that we're trying to help other families do because we are together a lot and maintaining an intimate marriage in the middle of the busyness of life is really, really important to be able to do that. And so we are learning as we go.
Yeah. Seems like y'all have the perfect playing field, so to speak, of all the things to just, opportunities to practice what you're preaching, so to speak, and really put it to work and see how it's working or not working for that matter within your own marriage and family. What a cool opportunity. Thanks for just taking us into your background a little bit. And those kind of phrases, some of those phrases that you mentioned in there, this phrase of emotional safety, this idea of being famous at home, are 2 of the things that I was hoping we could unpack in this conversation today. And so I know that you have, I don't think you mentioned this just now, but I know that you've authored several books, authored and co-authored. And so you have one about emotional safety being the key to raising kids. And so I do want to kind of double click into that phrase, emotional safety, for the kind of beginning of our conversation here. And I'm curious, what is emotional safety?
Yeah, such a great question. So, it's wild because you think about how we relate to other people, and you think of it in relation to. I'm going to go to the nervous system. Let's start with the nervous system. So When we are doing well, we all have this God given desire for safety, for connection, for belonging, and for dignity. Those are really the four core parts of who we are that we were created for. But when one of those things is threatened, when our sense of belonging, our sense of safety, our sense of connection, or our sense of dignity is threatened, we move from a place of, how do I describe this without getting too technical, of a really healthy place in our nervous system to we drop down to what's called the fight or flight system, okay? And fight or flight is where you start to, especially in relationship with close loved ones, it's where you get angry, it's where you react. It's the word emotion comes from a Latin word meaning to move, causes us to move. We're doing something to restore that sense of safety, belonging, dignity, or connection. And emotional safety is when we feel like we can be fully ourselves without getting shut down. It's when we feel like we can be fully ourselves without being punished for it. It's where we feel like we can be fully ourselves without someone minimizing our pain or our emotion that we're experiencing. And so our ability to enter into a child's world when they're in emotional overwhelm is key to calming down their brain, because when they're in fight or flight, as soon as we enter into fight or flight, the higher functioning parts of the brain, known for problem solving, emotion regulation, cognitive flexibility, social skills, even ultimately self-control, that part of the brain is shutting down. If you have toddlers, you understand this because that part of the brain's not even developed yet, right? And so they're losing their minds, and that's because that part of the brain isn't developed. And so when that part of the brain shuts down, we're doing everything we can to try to restore that. And this is why emotional safety is so important, is our ability to enter our child's world has a calming effect on their brain. So when we enter into their world and help begin to understand what it is that has been threatened, it calms their brain and starts to trigger that part of the brain that gets them to think straight. And this is why in that book I described it, according to the research, this is why every major outcome we desire in our children is linked back to emotional safety, is because when kids feel safe in their overwhelmed moments, it calms that fight or flight part of the brain, starts to trigger the higher functioning parts of the brain. And it's the higher functioning parts of the brain, when they are functioning well, that lead to every major outcome we desire in our kids. So you can imagine when you're thinking straight, when you have self-control, when you can regulate your emotions, when you can have cognitive flexibility, when you can problem solve well, when your social skills are functioning, that's what leads to getting good grades. That's what leads to developing healthy friendships. That's what leads to one day getting married, staying married, and having high marital satisfaction because you enjoy your marriage. It's what leads to having a faith that sticks. That's why emotional safety at the core is so important. And it's not the techniques that matters, it's the posture. So emotional safety is more of a posture than it is a technique.
Mm-hmm. So I hear how important it is for your kids to, feel safe when they're experiencing all of these emotions, when they're experiencing that fight or flight mode. But I imagine that in order for them to feel safe emotionally, it has to flow from their parents. And if you aren't emotionally safe, or you don't foster an emotionally safe environment in your marriage, like, how in the world are you going to be able to do that for your kids? And so I almost want to back up a second and kind of think through for a second, or ask rather, how do you foster this type of environment, this emotionally safe environment in your marriage? In your marriage first, that then leads, into having that for your kids as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm going to state this. This is actually really powerful. So we wrote another book called Famous at Home. And in this book, we talk about some of these research studies. But and the importance of getting both this. Famous at Home covers both the marriage, emotional safety in marriage, and parenting. But there's a research study out of Harvard University that looked at what were the top 10 parenting strategies to get the outcomes we most desire in our children. And so it was a meta-analysis, and a meta-analysis is where you take a whole bunch of data and you put it together and you find the averages of it to see what does the data actually say. They then asked parenting experts what they felt were the top 10 parenting strategies to get the outcomes we desire in our kids, and every one of the parenting experts got it wrong. So the top 10, I'm going to give you the top 3 because it speaks to what you're asking. Okay. The first one was love and affection, which makes sense. So love and affection was the number 1 parenting strategy to get the outcomes we desire in our kids. Number 2, the second greatest parenting strategy to get the outcomes you most desire in your children is a parent's ability to manage his or her own stress. Which leads to number 3, how you treat your spouse or how you treat a co-parent in a divorce situation. So I would argue that of the top 3, none of them have to do with a direct relationship with our children. They have everything to do with who we're becoming as adults. So you're exactly right. Our ability to be emotionally safe for our children is a reflection of how well we're doing it ourselves. Because even love and affection, we love because why? He first loved us. When you go to a therapist, the very first thing they're asking you is, what was your relationship like with who? Mom or dad? Yeah. In other words, how well were you loved? Because our ability to love is a reflection of how well we have received love. And Paul writes about this in Ephesians 3. He says, I pray that you might know beyond knowledge, head knowledge, the love of Jesus for you. And so it's critical that we experience it in our individual lives, first in our relationship with God, but it's also critical that we experience it then in our marriage. And the way to do that, this is what's fascinating about this, is I want you to think about something. When you hit a pain cycle with your spouse, when you hit an argument with your spouse, there is something going on in your spouse's heart that has caused them to drop from that healthy state of the nervous system where they feel that their sense of safety, belonging, dignity, or connection was threatened. And when we feel that, we cope a certain way. Now, how are we coping in that moment? That could be that we get short, we get passive aggressive, we withdraw. Maybe we get aggressive and we yell. We use harsh words or we name call. We could use sarcasm. There's a number of different ways that we cope toward our spouse when we are in that moment, or we feel like we've been criticized or we are criticizing. What does that do? That triggers the same feelings in your spouse, who then also gets defensive. And so the reason is because, and I think this is so beautiful how Jesus describes this. He says, unless you become like little children. Now he's referring to faith, like the faith of a child, right? But we have to realize that there was also parts of our inner child that were wounded when we were kids, that somebody wasn't safe with us. And so now all of a sudden, that's why when we get prickly with each other in our marriages, we start acting like children. Why? Because there was a wound in our own childhood somewhere where somebody wasn't present, or it wasn't fully healed or restored or redeemed. And so what we do is we help parents, spouses, learn how do I, with my wife, Christi, enter into and see the little girl that is within her that is scared, that is feeling unsafe, that is lacking dignity, that just lost her dignity in some way, that is feeling ashamed, the little girl that feels like she doesn't belong anymore. How do I enter into that and see that? Because that's what's going to have a calming effect on her brain to get her to think straight, to start seeing, hey, maybe what we're arguing about really isn't the issue. Maybe it's my internal conflict that I'm experiencing because I'm not feeling loved. I'm not feeling seen. I'm not feeling heard. And when both of us as spouses can begin to identify that both within ourselves, starting with ourselves, and then in our spouse, it gives us the ability to realize, oh, now I can enter into your world and help you realize you're not alone. I'm your greatest teammate. I'm not your worst enemy.
Mm.
And I want to come alongside you and I want to help you be that. And that just brings everyone's nervous systems down in the home, because what we're doing is we're simply entering in to our spouse's heart.
Mm. I feel like in this conversation right now, for someone listening or watching, they might be thinking, oh my goodness, like, I don't know if I've ever really, like, really thought about this. Like, I don't know that I've ever really thought about, like, am I providing an emotionally safe environment for myself, for my spouse, and certainly for my kids? Like, this actually maybe feels kind of foreign to me, and maybe some, like, light bulbs are going off for the first time, and they're like, oh, there's so much here to unpack. And so I kind of want to bring the temperature down just for a second for anyone that might be feeling like a little bit overwhelmed, and ask, what is a natural, good, like, very first step if you are in a situation where you're like, I don't know if I'm creating this type of safe environment for my wife or my husband, and by extension my kids. Like, where do I start?
It's a great question, and I think it's so important to think through, because we're all living in a very chaotic world. We're living in a very busy world. We're living in a world that is moving from thing to thing to thing. Our schedules, we're over-hurried. We're hurried. We're booked to the max. And all of our nervous systems are constantly being threatened by the safety, the dignity, the belonging, the connection, just by the schedules and pace that we live at in our culture today. So I just want to set the stage by saying, you will not be emotionally safe all of the time. It's just impossible. The way I describe emotional safety is that a safe relationship is love minus fear. In other words, perfect love casts out fear. Dan Siegel writes it this way. He says, in attachment, we want to be open to ourselves, feeling a sense of creating a sense of love without fear in our child. So this is the secular research saying we want to feel that safety in ourselves and create a sense of love minus fear, love without fear in our child. Mm. Well, in a secular way, you can't do that, because you can't reach it's not that you can't do that. You can't do it perfectly. Mm. Perfect love only comes through Jesus himself. So it all starts by each of us building our relationship, growing our relationship with Jesus, and constantly coming back and saying, Lord, would you help me to be still and slow down? And Lord, would you forgive me for where I'm rushed? Would you forgive me for where I'm not getting it right? Would you reveal it to me? And seeking that forgiveness from the Lord of where we are racing, because all of us are. Every single one of us are. And then I want to also give this sense of thank you for bringing the temperature down. John Gottman found that even if you get this emotional safety thing right just 2 out of 5 times with your kids, you can still get the outcomes you desire in your kids. Okay, you don't have to be perfect. You're not going to be perfect. Why? Because you're going to yell. You're going to say things you regret. You will mess up. You won't be emotionally safe all the time. And he found this in kids. He also found this in marriage as well. But why is it that you'd only need to get it right 2 out of 5 times? Because number one, you're going to get it wrong. And number two, he found the buffer. He found the reason that you only have to get it right 2 out of 5 times. And that buffer is this. It's a word called repair. And in the research, they call it the ultimate of relationships. In other words, when you mess up, your ability to seek the forgiveness of your kids or your spouse is the single greatest buffer for restoring and repairing the connection and the relationship. And so Jesus tells us to practice it all the time, as much as we've been forgiven, right? So this is forgiveness. The research shows that it is incredibly, incredibly powerful for restoring and redeeming the relationship. And so I just want to set the stage for that by saying you're not going to be perfect. Only He is, and only He will be able to restore where you're not. And then the way to make it right is repair with your kids and with your spouse. The most emotionally safe thing you can do, I believe, is number one, seek the forgiveness of Jesus, forgive yourself, and forgive others in your home. And if you really want to begin to understand where am I safe and where am I not safe, so let's take that conversation that we just had, let's shelve that for a second. Those are some techniques to try. And another one to try is to simply start with your spouse and ask, hey, what makes you feel safe? What is it that I do that makes you feel safe? And, your wife might say, it's when you play with my hair, or, when you call me a certain, pet name, or, hey, hun, or babe, or whatever. It might be when you help me in the kitchen. For a husband, it might be, hey, it's when we go for a walk together. Usually for a husband, it's side-by-side activity, right? What is it that makes you feel safe? And ask that question. When do you feel most connected to me? And if safe isn't a fun word for you, or it doesn't make sense yet, when do I feel most connected to you? When do I feel like I belong? Ask those questions. And then if you're really daring, just ask the question, what makes you feel unsafe? What makes you feel not connected? What is it that I do that I need to be aware of that makes it feel prickly in our relationship? Important questions to ask.
Yeah, I love those. And I love having some differences in the variation in language too. Just because, to your point, like someone might not, you might not utilize that word safety. It might not be like a normal part of your vocabulary. And again, you're hearing this for maybe the first time, or maybe you've heard it some in passing and you're like, we don't really use that language in our household. And maybe it's something that you're willing to try out and start seeing how it can fit into the vocabulary for your family. But even that phrasing like connection instead, but beginning to, regardless of the word itself, beginning to ask those questions is just a great like jumping point to get someone started. I'm curious if you would be willing to share a personal example, maybe from your marriage, maybe with your kids, maybe both, of how you have kind of begun implementing these practices within your own family.
Man, we've been doing this for so long that I've got so many examples for you that both where we've gotten it right, where we haven't gotten it right. So, I'll give you a most recent one, and I can give it in the context of marriage, since we're talking about marriage. I mean, I had one just last night with my son, where I had two yesterday with my son. So let me do that, and then I'll give you a marriage one.
Yeah.
Yesterday morning, our 5-year-old, and our 5-year-old's the one right now. I mean, the 13 and 11-year-old need me to be safe too. The 5-year-old's the one that is still coming out of, the not understanding certain things, not understanding his own emotions. And so even yesterday, he had a very overwhelming moment, anger, lots of anger, and he couldn't calm down, like literally could not calm down. And so I picked him up, and he didn't want me to pick him up at the time. I was like, buddy, we can't keep doing this. We're not going to go about it this way. And so he's angry, he's flailing, and he really wants down. I pick him up. I'm like, buddy, because he said, I can't calm down. I can't calm down. And it is physical touch. It is our bodies. The church has separated the body in the Western world. There's reasons behind that because of the Enlightenment. But we've kind of stayed stuck in our left brain, our cognitive brain, as it relates to faith. but there's a very deep part throughout history of our bodies and having an embodied faith and the way that our bodies are experiencing emotion. So for every one message that the brain is sending down, there are 10 that the body is sending back up to your brain. And so your body stores emotion, it stores trauma, it stores all these things. And physical touch is one of the most powerful ways to show that you love somebody. And so non-sexual physical touch. And so I'm holding him and he's reaching to the ground. He's trying to reach to the ground. I'm like, no, kiddo, we're gonna stay here a moment. And after about 30 seconds, you could just feel his body start to soften and start to go more limp. And then the next thing I know, his arm comes up around my neck and his head just settles into my chest. And he just dropped himself into my arms. And I was trying to figure out what was going on. And so we have a children's book called What Do I Do with Anger? And in that book, one of the phrases is, anger shows me what's deep in my heart. Naming that feeling can bring a fresh start. And because anger is what just drives the bus, and there's always a feeling behind that anger. And so we got to a place of, very long story short, we got to a place of realizing he felt lonely because his two older siblings were playing without him. And they wanted to do things that he couldn't do. And he felt lonely because he kept feeling left out, and he reacted in anger. But, a lot of times we can mistake that, his angry outburst, as disobedience. And then we punish, and then what we do is we punish the negative emotion instead of entering into it and trying to figure out where was the disconnect? What was he actually feeling? And so that's a way to, that happened literally just yesterday with my wife, with the two of us, we're navigating this all the time. I'm going to give you a bigger example here. This happened about a year ago, but, she came to me and she said, I have a confession to make. We're sitting on our back porch swing. And she said, I have a confession to make. And I'm like, okay, what is that confession? I'm like, what's going on here? And she said, I feel like you have, this is about a year and a half ago now. Yeah, maybe a little bit longer. She said, I feel like you've taken my voice. I feel like you've stolen my voice. Now, we have a podcast together. We run a business together. I'm trying to champion her voice all the time. So the story I'm telling myself and everything in me is starting to get defensive of going, now, wait a minute, that's actually not true because I fight for your voice. And her apology was, I'm sorry I haven't come to you sooner about this. Let me rephrase that. I'm sorry I didn't come to you sooner about this. But I want you to know I feel like you've taken my voice. And she said, I don't think you've tried to do it intentionally, but it happened. And so I started, and it had related to our podcast, and it related to the way that I was it related to our podcast and just different things we were editing and the ways we were editing and things like that. And it was subtle and it wasn't even like intentional. But in that moment, that wasn't the issue. It really wasn't the issue. Because, and the way that we say this is that, especially when it comes to emotional safety in marriage, that what's going on within your spouse's heart matters more than what's going on between the two of you. So what's going on in Christi's heart in this moment, she's criticizing me for what felt like stealing her voice, right? My ability to enter into her heart is more important than what she's actually bringing to the table. And so I got to a place of just going, help me understand this. Like, tell me more about this. Because I have to understand there's a threat to her safety, her belonging, her connection, or her dignity. And in this case, it was her dignity. Now, as her teammate in marriage, I want to be able to fight for her dignity. I want to fight for what's going on within her heart, because what's going on within her heart matters more than what's going on between the two of us. So in that moment, my ability to give in to the grain of truth in her criticism is very important versus defending myself. Because what it's triggering within me, the little boy in me is going, now wait a second here. I have done everything for you. I've fought for you. I've done all that, right? So the story I'm telling myself is there's no way I wouldn't fight for your voice. Of course I would. And But that's not going to help her. If I'm defending myself, I'm not entering in and hearing her story. I'm making it about me. And so I've got to pay attention to the internal conflict that I'm having in that moment so that I can truly enter into her world and help restore her sense of dignity. And so it got to a place where I first started by apologizing for the ways that has happened, asking her to help me understand how she's seen that happen and how she's experienced it. Because her experience, whether it's real or perceived, is very real to her. Her body's experiencing it. She's experiencing it. And I have to go there. And it got to a point where I'm saying to her, none of this matters. Like, what's going on between the two of us right now? Like, we can throw our podcast away. Like, I don't need to be doing this. What I care about more than anything is what's going on in your heart and our marriage. That's what I care about. And so that, to me, was an example of where we came together in a very, very strong, because this is a big moment for us, of me entering into her world to help her find her voice. And to be quite honest, she was right. And since then, she's found her voice in a remarkable way, which is unbelievable. But that was one of those coming together moments. That was a pivotal moment in our marriage. Now, we do this on an ongoing basis. Like, we're constantly checking in. One of the ways that we constantly check in with each other is what we call 15 minutes a day.
Okay.
And it's where we simply ask each other, what is one positive emotion and what is one uncomfortable emotion that you felt today? I'm not trying to fix it. She's not trying to fix me. We're simply entering into each other's worlds and we're listening to what was one uncomfortable and one positive feeling that we had today. And that in and of itself allows us to go a little bit deeper into the heart of each other rather than just talking about the business of the day.
And I think too, what is really cool about that example, I'm sure it didn't feel cool in the moment, but is the emotional safety that y'all had built up over time allowed for that conversation to take place. So that conversation likely couldn't have happened had you not put in the reps, so to speak,
Yes.
of having those 15-minute connection points each day, of practicing this, with each other and with your kids. And so it's just kind of this matter of you got to start somewhere, and
You're
just
exactly
starting
right.
somewhere allows you to get those reps in and get this practice in of, okay, creating these emotionally safe environments so that when there is a bigger example like that, and there will be, it can unfold in that type of way. But I don't want to say for sure. I guess I wasn't present in that moment, but my guess is that a conversation like that wouldn't have gone nearly as well, or wouldn't have been as productive or just received had you not been fostering that environment all along, or at least doing your best to.
Yeah. And it wouldn't have went as well years past.
Yeah.
Like we're, and that's what I want to encourage us. Marriage is the most sanctifying relationship on the planet. I mean, it is why God uses it as a caricature of our relationship with Him. You're never going to be perfect in your marriage. If you get to a point where you're not arguing ever, someone isn't speaking up enough. There's not enough individuation at that point. Like, we're two individuals in a relationship. Yes, we're one flesh, but we have to identify that there are two individuals in this marriage. And so I would just say this, like, 15 minutes a day, you're exactly right. What it does for us is it has allowed us, and again, it could last 2 minutes, it could last 5 minutes. We've had it last two hours or more. But it's the reps, as you said, that allow us to be able to have those two. Because if Christi wakes up this morning and says, "Hey, Josh, can we spend 2 hours tonight talking about our feelings?" I'm gonna be like, "There's a game on." Like, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
But you allow the atmosphere, you allow the environment to set the stage for these conversations to happen when they're supposed to, and you're able to enter in then and make it a priority. And I say it this way, that these little nugget conversations and these reps, if you will, what they're going to do is they're going to help you argue less, and they're going to help you restore it faster when you do have bigger arguments.
Yeah.
It's not that you're never going to fight again. I hope not.
Yeah.
Because those arguments are important, but that you're learning how to respect each other. You're learning how to be kind to each other. You're learning how to treat each other with dignity in those arguments.
Yeah.
That's the important piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of do a little bit of a left turn here. For a second, we've been diving deep into this conversation on emotional safety, but I do kind of want to tap into another thing that you speak on often, have written on, which you mentioned at the top of this conversation about being famous at home. And so wanted to ask at least one or two quick questions related to that as
Sure.
well for those listening that have little ones, right? And just this idea of, wow, am I being famous like in my own home? Am I bringing my best self to my family and to my home? And I guess the conversations kind of go hand in hand a bit there. But yeah, I'm curious. You talk about that. You talk about in a world that competes for everything, it feels like all of our time and attention. Why is it so important? Why is this concept so important? So important that you wrote a book about this as well. You have a ministry, you and Christi have a ministry related to this idea of being famous at home.
Well, I think it's because that you already are. If you're a parent, you already are famous at home. Your biggest fans live under your roof. And what ends up happening is we live in a culture, as you said, that's warring for our time, attention, and our identity, but particularly our identity. And when you study end-of-life surveys, what you end up finding is the thing that people regret the most. Bronnie Ware talks about this. She was a palliative care nurse in Australia and wrote a book on the regrets of dying. And one of the top regrets is number one is I wish I would have lived a life that I wanted rather than what others expected of me. Another one is I wish I would have not worked as much. And I wish I would have shared my feelings more. And I think what's fascinating about that is that we so often work our tails off. And as I said, one of the most common phrases I hear in some form or another is I can go to work and lead hundreds of people and I come home and don't know how to lead my own family. I've seen this happen so often where there's so much wealth built up. They've accomplished everything they need to accomplish in life, but they sacrifice their family along the way. And I see this in ministry a lot, where ministry takes the front seat and family takes the back seat, and what's given are the leftovers. And you have little kids who you are their biggest fan. And we're out here in an influencer world trying to gain followers and fans when your greatest fans are already living under your roof. And so that's really, you already are famous at home. Starting in your heavenly home. You are loved. You are seen. He loves you with an everlasting love. Though you walk through the valley of shadow of death, you shall fear no evil, for he is with you. You're famous first in your heavenly home, and then you're now most famous in your earthly home. And this is why Paul talks about this in 1 Timothy, in the letter to Timothy, is if you want to be a leader in the church, you must first take care of everything under your own roof. How can you take care of other things if you're not taking care of what's first underneath your own roof? David wrote about this in Psalms. He said, patience is better than power, and controlling one's emotions than capturing a city. You can capture the city, but if you can't control your emotions, you're going to lose the city. And our heart is making sure that you don't lose your family in the process.
What's one practical first step to making sure that you are, in fact, prioritizing your family above work, above, really just above the outside noise, right? Like,
great question. Yeah.
What's a practical step for
Yeah,
that?
the first thing that I would say is probably a little bit more um, it's more of a gauge than it is practical.
Mm.
It is, and I think this is really, really important, is where do you enjoy spending the most time? And asking yourself the question, where do I enjoy spending the most time? It's a good chance you're going to enjoy spending your most time at work. And if that's the case, now you're trying to figure out, how do I start to change where I'm going to enjoy where I'm going to experience most joy.
Mm.
And joy is relational. And so what ends up happening is that we experience joy when we are, the way that this is defined, Dr. Alan Shore talks about this, that the way that joy is defined is walking into a room and when I walk into a room knowing that someone is glad to be with me, it is the smile that comes across. It's being the apple of someone's eye, the smile that comes across their face. And so I've gotten to a point now where the very first thing that I do, and this leads to the practical, the very first thing that I do now when I come home, or when my family comes home, let's say I'm the one at home, when we're re-greeting each other with my kids or with Christi, my wife, I am making sure that I'm paying attention. I'm dropping whatever I'm doing. I'm putting a smile on my face, and I'm letting them know I am so glad they're home. I'm letting them know that I'm so glad to be with them. I want them to experience that I am glad to be with them. And man, when your kids experience that, when your spouse experiences that, it starts to shift things. And so often what we're doing in our busy culture is we are just, we're so busy and we're so overscheduled that we don't think we're just doing life, and we're focused on the negative. We're focused on what's not going right. And we're missing each other. And then we end up living as roommates. And I would just really encourage you, don't miss what you're grateful for. Don't miss what's under your roof. Yeah. And prioritize just by simply letting them know how glad you are to be with them.
Yeah.
Start there.
Yeah. I would say, gauging that, but I would say that is a very practical step of just, how am I greeting those to enter the door, if I'm home, or how am I being greeted, or how am I showing up? Am I showing up with just the weight of the day, and I'm just walking in and when it's just heavy, and hopefully if you've created a safe environment, that is something that you can unpack and debrief with your spouse, and really talk through, man, I'm just feeling the weight of today. But on the flip side of that, are you able to just show up in that moment of like, I am so glad, to see you guys again. Like, I am so glad to be reunited in that.
And I would say this too, especially with your kids, give them a hug and don't be the first to let go. Always let your kids be the first to let go.
Sweet.
You might stand there a while for some of them. I promise you.
Yeah.
But don't be the first to let go.
Our little girl is not old enough yet, so we can definitely hold her. Like, she's 5 months old, so we just squeeze her.
Yeah. You can just squeeze her. You'll be squeezing her all day. Yeah.
That's so sweet. That's very sweet. Okay. 2 more things here to kind of end our time, or as we're nearing the end of our time. When married couples don't practice these things, don't foster an emotionally safe environment in their home, don't foster this environment of our home and our family, is the highest priority. What are some consequences that you see of that, negative? What are some ways that impacts negatively when you're not putting into practice, not perfectly doing these things, but when you're not working towards some of these concepts that we've talked about?
Yeah. Remember, I'm going to go back to safety, belonging, connection, and dignity. When we are completely overwhelmed, when our nervous system is completely overwhelmed, we're living in fight or flight. And if we're not practicing safety in the home, or we don't feel the sense of safety in our home, we're going to find the sense of safety somewhere else. And that's either going to be, you're going to get it. By the way, your identity, if you're not getting it in Jesus, you're going to find it in one of three places. You're either going to get it in what you do, your assignment. You're going to get it in what you have, your material possessions, or you're going to get it in what you think other people think of you. So if you're not feeling safe at home, you're going to chase safety probably in one of those other areas, because you're going to chase it if you're getting the accolades at work, or in what you do, or online through social media, whatever. That's where you're going to turn. Eventually, if that's not feeling, and what it's going to do is it's ultimately going to create a divide between you and your spouse. I mean, at the end of the day, if we're not growing together, we're growing apart. You're not just staying stagnant. One or the other is happening. The question is what's the acceleration that it's happening at? And ultimately, what ends up happening is when we are living in fight or flight for way too long, we will eventually hit shutdown. It's called dorsal. And this is when you're completely numb. This is when you're finding yourself going to Netflix. This is when you find yourself just numbing out of life. And that's ultimately, and then ultimately you get to a place in marriage. John Gottman describes it as contempt. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's kind of like you're going to hit this place of, it has been so, there's criticism, right? There's criticism happening. And then ultimately, if that's not being met with in safety, we will eventually, over time, again, you're moving one way or the other. Question is how fast are you moving in that direction? It can lead to contempt. And then that's where resentment is built up. There's a wall built up. And now you've got to really work through things. And so the more that we can prioritize just growing one thing at a time. This is not, I know what you said in the beginning, like this can sound so overwhelming, and how do we bring the temperature down and really practice the 15 minutes a day? Practice just giving hugs to your family. Practice being glad to see them. Practice some of these things, very simple things. Practice saying, I'm sorry. Just practice. You're not going to always get it right. It's not going to change overnight, but but you're growing, you're progressing. Okay. Religion will require perfection. We're not requiring perfection. Jesus, the Holy Spirit, requires progress. It's about growth over time. That's why Paul uses botanical fruit to describe the fruit of the Spirit, botanical growth. You don't watch fruit grow. You can't see it happening. You can measure it over time. And the same thing is happening here. Let's measure our growth over time by implementing some of these small, practical strategies.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you for a final piece of advice or a key takeaway, though I feel that that might be it, of just requiring practice over perfection. I don't want to put words in your mouth, though. So if there is anything, just any final note that you do want to leave listeners or viewers with at the close of this conversation, definitely want to give you the floor for that. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. So
thank you. And thank you for having me. I would just say this, that none of this is possible, genuinely possible, without experiencing the love of the Father for you. We have to experience and understand what he did by sending his son Jesus to die on the cross so that we can die to our sins, that we can die to our flesh, our self-life, in order to receive the Holy Spirit and live out of the sense of love and joy and peace. This is where it really happens. And so when Paul says, I pray that you might know beyond head knowledge, gnoso and epignoso, I pray that you might know, you might experience in your body, that you might experience in your heart, your soul, your spirit, your whole being, the love of God for you, not just in your head, not just head knowledge. Cognitive head knowledge, love isn't going to last very long. I can know it, but I don't know him. And my heart and hope is that you are growing in your love of him and that you're experiencing his love for you, because it's out of that love that we can love others and step into and truly be safe in our homes. And so I just want to say, press into that the most. Press into your relationship with him. He is the place that you will find your safety, your connection, your belonging, and your dignity.
No better way to close than sharing the gospel. So I will not top that. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your knowledge and wisdom and just sharing in this conversation today. Definitely been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been an honor. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the WinShape Marriage Podcast. And we will be back here next week with a new episode. We hope that conversation blesses your marriage. If you're loving the WinShape Marriage Podcast, will you please take a moment to make sure you're subscribed? You may be a faithful listener and not realized you aren't subscribed. It really helps us out. Also, if you've enjoyed these conversations and they've impacted your marriage, please rate and review this podcast. One listener said, "Thanks so much for pouring into couples with godly wisdom and practical equipping."